Alright, here we go. Kamigawa Part 2. The rest of the stuff has been spoiled. They're done with spoiler season. I think everything's been revealed. I'm not sure if it's 100%, but this should be the last and final part of me going over Kamigawa, specifically the cards that you should know about. No, we're not going to talk about every little thing, but we will talk about the important pieces. Alright, so if you haven't seen the first video, watch it. We talk about a lot of cards in that one. But in this one, going to go over stuff that's been revealed since. So let's have a look, shall we? Gainlands are back, all 10 of them. Yeah, they're terrible, but they have some cool art on some of them. Ninja's Kunai, decent removal for any color. Not bad and limited, but otherwise, eh. Okay, here we have Eater of Virtue. Now this is interesting equipment. It only costs one, and it only costs one to equip. I think that's kind of what makes it decent. It's the low cost. It's just +2/+0. When the creature it's on dies, it eats its virtue, or it eats its abilities rather. Flying, first strike, double strike, death touch, haste, hexproof, trample, lifelink, menace, protection, reach, trample, and vigilance. So if any of the stuff it's exiled has those abilities, Eater of Virtue starts giving that to your future creatures. So over time, this could potentially build up and really make your creature have a lot of stuff. But the exiling does kind of stink because it shuts off any recursion that you could possibly do with that creature. But cool equipment. Not sure if it's good, but it's cool. We've got a reprint of the old 1 green mana hexproof target permanent. These you see some play and stuff where I don't know. I usually see them in like Death Touch decks and Poison decks and stuff like that because you want to protect your main Death Touch guy or whatever. But it also gives your permanent indestructible until the turn, and you gain 2 life. It's just a common, but it's pretty relevant. It can shut off removal that's targeting any of your permanents, and that indestructible can be relevant. I guess the lifelink could be relevant too. So, interesting common. Some more interesting commons here. Master's Rebuke. It's an instant for 2 mana that makes a creature you control deal damage equal to its power to target creature or planeswalker. That's kind of better than the typical fight, and it's instant, so pretty good removal for green. And we have Season of Renewal. It's also an instant for 3 mana, and it returns a creature or an enchantment from your graveyard to your hand, or both. So could potentially grab 2 cards. Interesting. I like that it's instant. Not real sure if it's good, but it's not too bad. Alright, this enchantment here, Harmonious Emergence, seems pretty good and limited. And look at the picture. It's an Oxalotl. It's an Oxalotl. Alright, well, it enchants your land, gives it, turns it into a 4/5 Vigilance Haste. Still land. And land is destroyed, instead you destroy this and the land is indestructible. So it's a 4 mana 4/5, but you kind of need to put it on an untapped land if you want to block an attack with it. So you sort of got to have 5 mana for this to really use it on the same turn. It's not too bad. It's not too good either, but it's worth a mention, I think. I think the big thing here is you can kind of protect one of your important lands. Like if you've got a land that's designed to, I don't know, like just something really valuable, which there are some in Commander. You can put this thing on it, and it's sort of like one of those umbras for your land. So interesting. I don't think it's good though, honestly. Alright, I guess I'll mention this common, the Grafted Growth. It just makes one of the land you enchant tap for 2 mana, which isn't terrible. There are better ones, but it also puts a little buff on a creature or vehicle. It might be decent if you need ramp and limited. Commune with Spirits here. It's just 1 green mana. Looks at your top 4, and you get an enchantment or land, and the rest go on the bottom. It's not terrible. It's like a little tutor. If you've got an enchant deck in general, it's probably going to be a guaranteed hit. But that's really only going to be playable in Enchantress decks, I think. Or maybe Shrine decks. It just wouldn't be bad as like a one of. And we have Careful Cultivation. You can enchant a creature, and it's 3 mana, kind of expensive. It's +1/+3 reach and tap for 2 green. That's kind of a trap because like it makes it a good blocker, but they can tap for mana. So now you got to decide whether you need it for mana or you need it for blocking. And if you need both, you're kind of screwed. So that's always painful. But it does have channel, which I think is where this kind of shrines. You get a little human monk that taps for green. It does cost 2 mana to channel it, but the versatility could be pretty good here, because one of the problems with auras is sometimes you just need a creature to put it on, and this still works in some way if you don't have a creature to put it on. And it is a 2 mana ramp spell, which is not bad in standard. I think it's decent for a common. Alright, we got another, this is like a premium common and limited if you're drafting, the Scrapyard Steelbreaker. A 3/4 for 4 mana, it's not too bad, but you can also turn it into a 5/5 and then even bigger by paying 1 and sacking another artifact. This could be good if you're getting, well, I don't know, what else do we have? There's like vehicles and stuff, but you really want some fodder to sack. You probably don't want to sack good artifacts, so you probably need like treasures or a bunch of bloods or something. But I can see some potential here. Buffing 2 power for 1 mana could be really good. I feel like there might be a place for this with those vampire decks that create a bunch of blood, because you could just swing out with this Steelbreaker and hit for like a lot very suddenly. But other than that, I don't think it's good. It's just a pretty interesting common. Alright, another big comment. I guess there's there's a lot of comments here, so we're just gonna point out the ones that are half decent. Iron Hoof Boar, sure, not great. It's big trample haste, so this is another thing that's probably going to be pretty good and limited, just if you're trying to go aggro and limited, because you get that 6 mana, you drop a 5/4, you swing with it right away. It's kind of dangerous, and it's got trample. But also, if you can't get to that big a mana, you still got a combat trick on your hands for 2 mana, +3/+1, and trample. Can be relevant. I don't think it's that great, but you might see, it'll probably see some limited play. Experimental Synthesizer. It's another common. I feel like it's decent artifact fodder because for 1 mana it comes out and it basically replaces itself right away. So it's almost like a cantrip, but you can also, if you're not using this artifact for sacking to something else or whatever, you can eventually turn it into a little samurai if you run out of other stuff to do. I feel like it's pretty strong for a common. And we've got another land recursion, or land creator. Makes a 3/3 for 2 mana, which is not too bad. And once again, the land doesn't die. If it dies, instead, you just sack Crackling Emergence. So I feel like this is half decent, but it's not that big of a deal, really. It's only a 3/3. It's just if you're going really hard into aggro, it could be a cheap enough 3/3 that it matters. 2 mana for a 3/3 is pretty solid. And you're not going to lose your land, so that's nice. Yeah, we got Virus Beetle. More commons here, but I just love the art on this thing. This has some of the coolest art. ETB, each opponent discards a card. It's nice that it's each opponent, so that's kind of cool. It makes it maybe somewhat viable in Commander, especially if you need some artifact fodder or creature fodder, because it could potentially make like 3 people discard a card. That's decent value for 2 mana. You get a 1/1. You can get rid of 3 cards. It's decent for a common. It's reminiscent of there was that elf that did this. I can't remember if that was target opponent or each opponent, but very similar. It's just such cool art. A little virus beetle. Alright, here we do have some premium removal and treasure generator. Decent comments here. Twisted Embrace. Usually these enchantments that try to do something with removal are terrible, but this one might be half decent. Enchants an artifact or a creature. When it ETBs, you destroy target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. So pretty premium removal for limited. And if it's the permanent is a creature, you get +1/+1. Now you gotta, always the danger of these enchantments is you get 2 for 1. You cast it while it's still a spell, they remove its target and it fizzles. I don't think fizzle is a word anymore, but it basically essentially gets countered and you lose out on your destroy trigger. But if they're tapped out, it's fine. Or if you can target one of your vehicles and you're pretty sure they don't have artifact removal, it's a little more reliable. So it's decently reliable. I don't know if you could call it premium removal. It's still sorcery speed. But it's definitely worth knowing about, and it might be pretty playable and limited. Yeah, I think it will be. The other thing we have is Undercity Scrounder. It's a 1/4 for 3, and you can tap to create a treasure token if a creature died this turn. And it's an artifact creature, so I feel like it's half decent. I don't know if it's that playable, but just given that it can ramp you occasionally is kind of nice. And you can just wait till end of turn to activate it. So hopefully end of your opponent's turn if something died. If you can get a few treasures out of this, I think it becomes worth. But maybe not that great. I don't know, questionable. All right, we're seeing a few other things here. Okay, this I feel like is half decent. Return to action. I love the art. The art is sweet. It gives a creature +1/+0 in lifelink. It's instant for 2 mana. And when the creature dies, return to the battlefield. Now, that's kind of cool because, you know, life gain. You basically could get some life, you get your creature back, potentially win a trade. Pretty good, but, you know, they really rely on the correct situation, so it can be pretty tough. But that's a decent set of effects. If you can get them all to be to your advantage, it's a pretty nice spell that could put you ahead. Over here we have Reckoner's Bargain, which is also another life gain spell. It's a 2 mana instant. You gotta sack an artifact or a creature, and you gain life equal to the permanent's mana value. So you could potentially get a solid amount of life here, and you draw 2 cards. So it replaces itself and the thing it sacks essentially with the draw 2, and you gain some life. So some decent little commons. Of course, typically you want to play stuff like this Reckoner's Bargain when it was going to die anyway, or in response to their removal spell. So they kind of lose their removal spell, and you get some life and draw cards. But occasionally you want something to die, so you can get its leave battlefield trigger or something. It's decent there, or maybe you just have a token that you don't care about. So the cards like this, I feel like you gotta put them in the right deck. They don't belong in every deck, but if you can get them at the right time, sometimes they're pretty good. All right, we've got the classic 3 mana. Target player discards 2 cards here. There's a lot of half decent commons, and ninjas and rogues get menace until the end of turn. I don't know. It might be good. It's decent value if you need to get your attackers through for some connect triggers, and you can make someone discard 2 cards. Potentially a lot of value on a single card. So not too bad. It's a pretty nice direct upgrade from Mind Rot if you've got ninjas and rogues, but those spells can be pretty situational, especially late game when someone doesn't have any cards in hand anyway, or if they've got you beat on board. This doesn't help much, but I guess it's worth a mention. Alright, this one's definitely worth a mention because it's enchantment removal in black, and you don't see that too often, but we're starting to see it here and there. Target opponent exiles a creature, or target opponent exiles an enchantment they control. So you have to choose one. It's kind of like sack, except it's going to exile it. So if they've only got one enchantment, they got to pick their best enchantment. If they've only got one creature, they got to pick that awesome creature. So it's 3 mana, but it is instant, so you can get them at instant speed when it's most effective. And it could be some pretty solid removal, and it's got some versatility. Pretty good for a common, if you ask me. Clawing Torment. I don't know if this is great, but it is only 1 mana, and things that are 1 mana are pretty often playable. So if you're playing an aggro deck and you need to get your attackers through, this is nice because it makes it so the enchanted permanent, well, it enchants an artifact or a creature. It makes it so it can't block. That's nice. But if you happen to put it on an artifact, you can at least get this lose life trigger. So it's kind of a decent, well, I don't know about decent, I think it's kind of bad, but still, it has some effects that are unique. That's why it's worth mentioning. It makes the creature get -1/-1 and can't block, and at the beginning of their upkeep, they lose 1 life. So it's got a lot of aggro on it because they can't block, so you're going to get more attackers through, damage. At the beginning of their upkeep, they're going to lose life, so more aggro. This could be pretty good for an aggro-y deck to sideboard in if they've got a lot of things they're trying to block with. To just put this on and say, hey, you can't block, so you're going to lose more life from my attackers, and you lose life during your upkeep now. All for 1 mana is kind of good in some situations. Wow, there's a lot of commons, but we're going to keep going. Yeah, I'm skipping a lot of the terrible ones, as I mentioned, like Chain Flail Centipede. Meh, I don't think it's worth talking about. Alright, so Suit Up, 3 mana instant. It makes an artifact, or makes a creature or vehicle become a 4/5 until the end of turn, and it cantrip, so you get to draw a card. I really like that it draws you a card. And it can potentially get you a little surprise blocker and kill something. So I feel like it's half decent. Yeah, given that, it's kind of got some 2-for-1 capabilities on it, which is not bad. because you might be removing something of your opponents if you get that surprise blocker and you're drawing a card. So if you can get that situation, it's definitely worth, but that's going to be kind of situational. I guess worst case scenario, you can just target whatever and draw a card at the end of your opponent's turn or something. So it's at least got some fallback of, okay, well, if I can never make use of this 4/5, at least I can still draw a card. So not bad for a common. A little pricey on the cost maybe, but it is a 4/5, so it's not that pricey. Alright, another comment is definitely worth mentioning. At first, it doesn't seem that significant, but when you start thinking about it and the things and loops it can get into, it becomes a little more interesting. Okay, 4 mana, 3/3 flying fish. And look at the art. That art is beautiful. Ah, it is. Okay, so it reads, whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. So that sounds like whatever. You get to loot a little bit when an artifact comes out. But where this becomes good is like with stuff like, you know, there's a lot of stuff in Commander and Legacy and Modern where you can just generate a million treasures per turn, and with this sort of effect, you can just draw your entire deck or sculpt your hand essentially, because it's like, all right, Dockside Extortionist creates 10 treasures. I can draw 10 cards, discard 10 cards. And you basically, it's kind of like a Wheel of Fortune or something if you do stuff like that. So pretty, it's got a lot of shenanigans on it for a common that you could do in old formats. I don't think it's going to be good in standard in particular. It is still a 3/3 flying for 3, so it's pretty good to be decent and limited. And you could potentially loot away some lands, draw a card, discard a land or something unlimited. It's pretty good. So I think this card is better than it originally seems, especially for a common. It's just got a lot of potential on there with artifact loops. Like if you've got some way to bounce and recast a 0-cost artifact over and over, you can essentially draw your entire deck with this thing. So yeah, definitely worth knowing about the Sky Swimmer Koi. Maybe the most interesting common so far, just because of the loops it can get into with treasure and 0-cost artifacts that can, you know, if you can find a way to just keep looping stuff. This is one of those things that's going to keep your turn and combo going potentially in a lot of those combo-y decks like that. And the thing that comes to mind immediately is like Joyra in Commander is probably going to want this. She already has whenever you cast a historic spell, draw a card, artifacts, legendary sagas. So you cast a cheap instant or a cheap artifact, you get to draw a card off Joyra. Then when it ETBs, you get to draw, discard again. And like the more of that stuff you can get with her, you can end up just drawing a whole bunch of cards for one artifact. Yeah, so Joyra is probably going to want this common. All right, some other really interesting commons here. Are they good? Not sure, but these are both okay. Okay, Miminonic Spear. 2 mana artifact, does nothing, except you can pay 2, sack it, draw 2 cards. But it also has Channel, where you can just pay a blue, discard it, and draw a card. So turn 1, you can just toss this thing, draw a card, or turn 2, if you don't have turn 2 play, you can play it, and later draw 2 cards off of it. If you got ways to reoccur your artifacts, it's even better, because you could, if you can get this out of your graveyard and keep playing and keep drawing. Some interesting stuff could happen with this Miminonic Sphere, and it's a common. It's pretty cool for a common. Over here we have the Mirror Shell Crab, which is, alright, it's a 5/7 for 7 with Ward 3. Not great, but if you need a big body and you got nothing else, you can play him. But it also has, for 3 mana, a Channel, and discard, counter target spell, or ability unless its controller pays 3. Now what's really important about this is it says or ability. It can counter planeswalker activations. It can counter you know, any of those abilities on creatures too. So this guy might be a little better than he seems. That Channel, if you can, you know, if you can stop a really important spell early game, that's great. Usually the problem with these big creatures is they sit in your hand and do nothing, and you never get to cast them. But given that you can use it as a counter for a spell or ability, you're going to get to use this early on for some value, and I think it makes it half decent, especially for a common. Good old Mirror Shell Crab. And if you want it in your graveyard, if you're going to do some mass recursion anyway, he's a decent thing to reanimate too, and it has a way to get in your graveyard while creating some value. So not too bad for common. And we've got another counter spell. It's just a 2 mana counter target spell. But as additional cost, you have to tap an untapped artifact you control or pay 1. So it's sort of like a better cancel. And if you've got some artifact fodder, it's basically just counter spell. If you don't, it becomes more like cancel, which is the counter target spell for 3 mana. So not bad for a common. It gets a counter in your deck that potentially only costs 2 mana, which is something they took out of standard and stopped printing a long time ago because it was too obnoxious, and now it's kind of back. So yeah, if you combine some of the other counters with this thing and this crab, you could potentially, I can see some cases where some control decks are coming back online, and you might see some in standard, and everybody hates playing against them, but they are a thing to be aware of for sure. All right, I'm going to mention this one just because it shuts off a lot of different things, including planeswalkers, which could be pretty relevant. Intercessor's Arrest. Enchant permanent for 3 mana. All right, we see these pretty frequently, the style cards, and usually they're not great, and maybe this one's not great either, but it's half decent. Enchanted permanent can't attack, block, or crew vehicles. So it can shut off a creature or a vehicle. So that's nice, and it can also, sometimes you just crew with the, especially in this particular format now, it looks like people are just going to crew if you put something like a pacifism on one of their creatures. But now it can't. And this is enchant permanent, so you can also put this on lands with activations. You could put this on planeswalkers to make them no longer do anything, because it says its activated abilities can't be activated unless they're mana abilities. So it is a lot of versatility given that it's enchant permanent. That's what I really like about this. It could also shut off artifacts that can be activated. Now this is somewhat limited in that if it's just something that sits out there and triggers, so artifacts and enchantments that just trigger maybe some of the shrines and stuff, it won't do anything against them really, because it only shuts off the activated abilities. But still worth noting, and it's probably decent removal for limited and white. All right, now it looks like we're getting to some more interesting stuff. Imperial Recovery Unit. This is a 3/4 vehicle for 3 mana, which is meh. It's okay. And it's got crew too. But when it attacks on attack trigger, not on combat damage, but attack trigger, these are always better when it's just on attack you get the trigger because it's almost guaranteed. You return a creature or vehicle with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to your hand. This is pretty good. It's, a little bit like Luris in a way, where you're going to get to typically cast at least one cheap thing out of your yard every turn. You just, crew, swing, something comes back to your hand. It is only target creature or vehicle, but that's still not too bad. If you're running a lot of 2-drops that you're getting value out of, this could be a viable equipment to get the Recursion going and keep it going. And given that vehicles are somewhat immune to sorcery speed board wipes, it's going to be a nice thing to have around, because one of the problems with aggro is someone just board wipes and you got nothing left. If you've got the recovery unit, you can, play your one creature, whatever you manage to save, and start swinging with this and get stuff back. So I think this thing has got a decent place, and might see some play, this Imperial Recovery Unit. All right, next up we have Colossal Sky Turtle. I really like this card. This card, the more I read it, the better it gets. All right, so its casting cost is huge. You're never going to cast it. That's, just forget about that. Actually, most of this stuff is somewhat irrelevant, but it's just kind of a bonus because it's got some, okay, maybe you can reoccur it and get a 6/5 flying ward too. That could be kind of cool in late game when you got nothing else, and you could hard cast and get a 6/5 flying, which is pretty relevant big body in the air. All right, but it also has these 2 different channel options, so a very modal turtle. All right, and one of these, the very bottom one, I think is the biggest, most important one. You can discard them, 2 mana, discard, bounce a creature. And that's like always good, You can bounce your own creatures to save them. You can bounce your opponent's creatures to, when they try to do something like equip them or put an aura on them and make them, 2-for-1 them with that. So this thing just sitting in your hand ready to be a bounce is quite relevant, and it's probably going to be its most common use, is just to get a little bounce spell off of it. And often the problem with these bounce spells is, well, if you never really find a use for them, then the spell's kind of useless. But this is incredibly modal because it has another channel ability too. You can discard it for 3 mana and return target card from your graveyard to your hand. And I believe you could do these channels at instant speed. So yeah, you can just instant speed stuff back, you can instant speed bounce, and worst case scenario, you hard cast them as a 6/5. But also this channel gets them into your graveyard, so if you got some graveyard recursion, bring creatures back to the battlefield type stuff, it's also a great way to get them in the graveyard. There's just a lot of potential with this Sky Turtle. I think it's a solid card. I think it's a really solid card. Once again, one of these giant casting cost creatures that you don't mind having in your opening hand because you can still just use it as a bounce early on. And yeah, I feel like this turtle's better than he seems. The more you read it, the better he gets. It's one of those cards I think it's definitely going to see some play. Alright, we're getting into some new rares and stuff. March of Swirling Mist, phases some stuff out. Don't think it's really that great. Invoke the Ancients. For 5 mana with lots of green at sorcery speed, you get 2 4/5 spirits. That's some, that's 8-10 worth of power toughness on the board for 5 mana. Not bad. One of them's Vigilance, one of them's Trample. I think this is pretty good. In mono green, if you can cast this on turn, let's see, 3 or 4. Yeah, that's going to be a lot of stuff on the board for turn 3 or 4. 2 4/5 spirits. This card might make mono green really strong in standard in general, because that's just a lot of power to add to the board for 5 mana. Woo. Yeah, I debated whether this is good or not. It's not good if your opponent has a way to bounce your tokens, but they're not always going to have that. And if they don't, they're going to have to deal with 2 big 4/5s pretty early on. And really only playable in mono green, so I guess it's a drawback, but this card could make mono green pretty strong. Alright, we got a couple others here. I don't think the Long Reach of the Night's very good. It's just too expensive for what it does, but it's not terrible, so we're going to kind of skip it. But this one on the right, it's actually a terrible card, but we're going to talk about it specifically because it's a mythic. Unfortunately, it's one of those 10-cent mythics that you cry when you get that as one of your mythics in your box, because you're like, dang it, I got the worst mythic in the set. Because, yeah, let's go over it, and I'll explain why I think it's overall quite terrible. Okay, so it's 3 mana. Now, if this was like an uncommon or something, I could see it being okay. But this is a mythic. What the heck is this doing in a mythic slot? Alright, 3 mana, you get a Llanowar Elves. Worst thing ever. Like, who cares? That's a 1 mana creature. This thing should always just be 1 mana. So like, worst case scenario, it's pretty bad. Like, you're still getting some ramp, so there's that, but in general, in any of the older formats, it's just always going to be better to play like Llanowar Elves or Elvish Mystic or any cheap 1-drop, because this is not a good body to get for 3 mana, especially on a mythic. They forgot to power creep this thing, honestly. Wizards, where you at? You need to work on your power creep. This is a mythic here. Alright. So on its second lore counter, you get a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 creatures. So you get to buff some of your board a little bit. Now, these can be good, but usually in 1v1, what tends to happen on these kind of things is your board gets removed, and this ends up as a dead trigger. So a lot of times this will just not do anything. But when it does work, it's going to be somewhat nice, but it's just a couple +1/+1 counters. It's not anything that devastating. Most likely you're going to put one on this monk and one on something else. Hopefully, if you've got something else. That's still incredibly lackluster for a mythic. So the first 2 things are just not that great. Alright, and at the end it flips into a 2/2. So let's check out this 2/2. It better be really good for a mythic, right? To kind of make up for how not that great the first 2 are. Let's see. Alright, it's a 2/2 flying. You get a green flyer, Dragon Spirit. Okay, that's something. You don't see too many flyers in green, so that's something. Alright, but is it mythic value? I don't know. Let's see. Let's read the rest of it. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you can pay X. When you do, put X +1/+1 counters on this. So it's essentially a Wildborn Preserver, but with flying instead of reach. In case you don't know what Wildborn Preserver is, here it is. It's from Throne of Eldraine. It's a 2 mana, 2/2 with flash, reach, and kind of the same trigger, except it's whenever a non-human creature ETB is under your control, you can pay X, put that many counters on it. So similar ability, except a little easier to trigger. But this thing having flash reach was always pretty nice. So a little reminiscent of that ability. And then as long as you control 5 or more modified creatures, Rising Star gets +5/+5 and has trample. That's going to be pretty hard to get 5 modified tramples, so this bottom ability is almost never going to happen. If it does happen, you're probably already in a situation where you're taking over the game. So this is kind of just like adding fire or adding fuel to a bonfire at that point. So not the most relevant ability on the bottom, but it could be relevant. Just being able to buff up a big old green flyer over time for a lot of mana is half decent. I still don't understand why this is a mythic though. It's very lackluster for a mythic, and those first 2 triggers are just not really good enough to make up for it. But it's worth knowing about. It's just gonna, yeah, it's definitely gonna be that cringe mythic when you open it and you're like, oh, I got the mythic slot. It's the worst one. It's that card. And here we have what might be one of the worst rares in the set. No one's going to play this, I don't think. Alright, so equipment, or a vehicle rather, a 4/3 for 2 mana, which sounds like a decent stat line, crew 2. Yeah, not bad, but still, that's not anything that's going to be that great. So when it attacks, you can sack an artifact or creature and put a +1/+1 counter on it, and it gains a menace until the end of turn. Now, you need some fodder. The problem with these is you need fodder, and you typically don't want to, like, a lot of the time, you just don't want to sack your stuff, because you need your stuff. So it's going to be kind of hard to get this to be a valuable thing to do, unless, once again, you have a bunch of blood tokens or something, or maybe extra treasures, or, a creature that you want to die anyway. But yeah, sacking your stuff's kind of rough sometimes unless you got a deck built around it. So I'm trying to come up with a case for where this is good and deserves to be in a rare slot, and I'm not seeing it. So I think this is going to be another one of those dump rares. It's just like, oh dang it, got the 10-cent rare. So there's you got to have some of them. It's not like you can't make every rare be a bomb, but kind of unfortunate. Now, this Patchwork Automaton is an uncommon, and I think this thing's a bit better, especially in maybe some decks we talked about earlier with some artifacts stuff. It is only cast, though. It's not ETB. Okay, well, let's talk about it. It's 2 mana for a 1/1 construct with Ward 2. Not great, but not terrible. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. Okay, maybe not that great, but could be good in something like Joyro, like we talked about earlier, where this is going to potentially get really huge in one turn. It doesn't do anything else, though, so I don't know. It's just one of those things that's going to grow and could potentially be pretty good. Like, we can get it to a 3/3, it starts becoming a decent value for that 2 mana. I don't know if we'll see it played, but I guess it's worth mentioning. Okay, Farewell. We talked about this last time. We see the art for it now. Pretty nice. For 6 mana, choose one or more. So you could choose all of these. Exile all artifacts, creatures, enchantments, and or graveyards. I like this card. I feel like it's a very solid board wipe. The exile is really nice because it gets rid of all that indestructible stuff and the things you couldn't find a way to handle. It's one of the few cards in the format that could get rid of a lot of different things. I'm trying to think of something specific, but there's something. So not bad. Pretty worth playing, I think, in mono white, especially in control decks where you just need to reset the board. Doesn't hit planeswalkers though. I guess that's fine. It does enough already. All right, these bronze Crudgels, the little batons. These are kind of cool. It's 1 mana for 1 mana. Equip as well, 1 mana cast. Well, I guess you need a ton of mana to dump into this. So it buffs. Let's see. Till the end of turn, equip creatures +X+0, or X is the number of times this ability has resolved. So the first time it's just +1/+0, pretty terrible. Second time it's +2, then +3. I guess once you dump like 8 mana into this, it starts being pretty significant. Nah, this is a terrible card actually. it's just too much mana. You dump 8 mana into anything, it better be good. And this, it's still not really that great at that point either. There's just better stuff you could do with all that mana in general. So actually not as good as I thought it would be. Here is a pretty relevant shrine because, well, it's a shrine, so it gets you more of those shrine triggers if you're playing shrine. But what's really actually good about this is that it's a 0/4 flying. So you can play this early, and you can stave off your opponent's aggro so that you can build up your shrines. That's actually the important thing here, is you get a shrine and a good blocker in the air, so you can have more time to build up. That's kind of going to be the point of shrines anyway. You want to be able to build up, and this is going to enable that a lot. And well, it has mill. You can mill for the number of shrines you have, which you know, if you're doing the shrine deck, maybe that's okay, but most of the time you might want to skip that in case they have graveyard recursion and just use your other shrines. But who knows, if you can mill them out a couple turns, maybe it's worth it. And you could also mill yourself if you've got recursion, so that's somewhat relevant. Alright, now we get to some of the big dogs. Rizona, Asari Commander, 3 mana, 3/3. Human Samurai, she has haste. Whenever she deals combat damage to a player, if she doesn't have an indestructible counter, you put one on her. Whenever combat damage dealt to you, remove the indestructible counter. Alright, I mean, that's decent. The art is super sweet. It's a decent aggro body that's going to be somewhat difficult to handle once it gets that indestructible on it, because it's like you gotta get an attack through first, and then you can kill her. So I could see her being a pain, especially she's going to be really good to modify and equip up because of all this indestructible stuff you got to deal with. But I don't know if she's super great. The important card here is Hermit Druid. Yeah, Hermit Druid is back, except not quite as bad. Now I'll show you Hermit Druid so you can get a good idea of what Hermit Druid does in case you don't know. He's a 2 mana 1/1 where you can pay a green, tap him, reveal cards from the top of your library until you get a basic land, put all other cards into your graveyard. So Hermit Druid has classically been used as one of the best ways to just fill up your graveyard. If you just don't run a lot of basic lands, he ends up putting a ton of cards in your yard, and he gets you your land drop. But yeah, he was using a lot of recursion, living death type stuff to just fill your yard. Hasn't been reprinted since Stronghold, so yeah, there hasn't really been anything like him for a long time. But now we have the Snake Druid. It's a 2 mana 1/3, so decent body there. And it's a Snake Druid enchantment creature. Shigeki. These names, they're so hard to say. All right, so you can a little more expensive. I mean, he's not as good as Hermit Druid, to be completely honest, but it's reminiscent of Hermit Druid. All right, so you got to pay 2, tap him, and return him to your hand. Reveal your top 4, put a land from among them into the battlefield, tap, put the rest in your graveyard. So this guy's kind of like Thawing Glaciers and Hermit Druid and like Ancient Stirrings or something. I don't know. Something that gets a land. All kind of rolled into one. Yeah, he's going to ramp you a little bit. You got to pay 2 mana to get him out, which is fine, because he's going to sit around and potentially be a half-decent blocker. And then you can activate him at instant speed, so you probably do this at your opponent's end step, right before it's your turn, so he'll still stick around. Or you can activate this to save him, to bounce him to your hand, so if they try to remove him, you go, oh, I'll activate him, return him to my hand, your spell is going to not resolve because it doesn't have a target, and you most likely get a land into play, so a little ramp there. So they're already decent enough, but he also has a channel. And this is really significant because if you get to keep activating him and get value, you're going to have a lot of mana. And he's going to kind of naturally come back into your hand, so you're definitely going to get this channel late game when it's relevant. So a pretty nice 1 or 2 of in about any green deck, I think, because of this late game potential. I mean, he's not very good for aggro, but he's pretty good for stabilizing and going late game. All right, so what is this channel? It's green XX, so you got to pump at least 4 mana to get basically a regrowth. Return X target non-legendary cards from your graveyard to your hand. Non-legendary somewhat hurts. You can't get your big scaries, but you could still get your really relevant spells, especially if you've got, yeah, If you've got some solid spells and stuff you need to get back, this guy was just going to kind of do that naturally. When you're done playing them and trying to get lands, you just say, okay, now I'm going to get some stuff back from my yard. So, yeah, this card's really good. Really, really good. Nice value on it. It's going to definitely be one of those cards that gets played in Commander just for its rampiness and its late game potential of recursion. A very solid, versatile little Snake Druid, Hermit Druid replacement or something like that. I guess not replacement. Oh, I guess, I didn't even mention this, but okay, so you put the land onto the battlefield tap. The rest go into your graveyard. They don't go into the bottom of your library. That's what makes them like Hermit Druid, is that the other stuff goes into the graveyard. And he has a way to get some of that stuff that you've put into your graveyard back. So, yeah, just a really cool creature. I think he's pretty solid. All right, we got, I guess this guy's worth mentioning, Dockside Chef. He's a 1 mana, 1/2. And sack an artifact or creature, pay 2, sack an artifact, creature, draw a card. Human citizen. That's not terrible. If you've got a lot of artifact fodder, you're probably going to use this ability. So, yeah, I don't feel like he's terrible. He's not that playable. He's got to be in the right deck, but potentially half decent. I guess worth mentioning. And we got another 10-cent mythic. This is another one of those. We see these all the time. This Volcanic Salvo. And, we always see these massive casting cost red spells that can be cheaper, but their effect is like, for 10 mana, it's only 10 damage. That's not that big of a deal. All right, what additional cost to cast this? Tap any number of untapped creatures. A spell costs 1 less for each creature tapped this way. It's essentially, what is that? Not improvised, but the other one. Yeah, so you can cheapen it by tapping your own creatures, which is okay. 10 damage to any target. You don't even get to spread it out. At least you can do 10 damage directly to someone's face. It is sorcery speed, so that makes it a lot weaker. And what makes it the worst is you're going to find this in the mythic slot in your box. Another 10-cent mythic. No one plays these. You don't see these played ever. You're like, okay, you could make the case of sometimes it could cost 2 red. Yeah, if you've got 8 other creatures on the board, and if you've got 8 other creatures on the board, you probably already won the game anyway. And why isn't this instant? It's mythic. Where's the power creep, Wizards? Why do you make some mythics completely insane and others like common value strength? I don't get it. It just annoys me that you could pull this as one of your mythic slots, and it's just such a terrible card. Now we got an insect ninja here. I guess this is okay. I don't know if it's really worth talking about. Yeah, Springleaf Avenger, 5 mana, 6/5, deals combat damage to a player. You get a permanent from your graveyard back to your hand. That's just kind of, it's a big body. It's got ninjutsu 4. Not real sure if this is going to be played at all. It's a lot of cost, and the body's nice, but typically you want something a little better than a combat damage to a player trigger on something this big. People are just going to chump this all day in general. If it gets through, if you're getting a 6/5 through, you're probably winning just from the damage anyway. So getting permanents back isn't that huge of a deal at that point, in my opinion. You can ninjutsu it, which makes it a little better, but yeah, 4 mana 6/5 is not bad. I don't know. I just don't think it's going to be played much, but it's kind of cool. All right, Dragon Spark Reactor. Another thing that it seems bad at first, but the more you think about it, the more potential you realize it has. Now, the problem with this is it's just a dead card. It's one of those things that's kind of more like an insurance card. So whenever ETBs, you put a charge counter on it. Whenever another artifact ETBs under your control, you put another charge counter on it. So another thing that could be good if you're generating a ton of treasure, because it's going to build up a ton of counters. Pay 4, sack it, deals damage equal to the number of charge counters to target player, and that much damage to one target creature. So if you're getting a loop where you're playing a lot of artifacts or getting a lot of ETBs, a lot of treasures, a lot of blood, this could potentially just go off one turn for like 20, 30, some huge amount. So it might slot into some of those decks that just do artifact ETB loops pretty well as a kill card, since it can hit players. but the problem is it generates no value until you actually sack it. Until then, it's just like build charge counters, get scary, and then eventually it's going to blow up and kill you if you don't remove it. But until then, it's not really that big of a deal. So I don't know. I'm a little on the fence about it. It's a cool card. Alright, I think both of these cards are good. Seismic Wave and Unforgiving one. Seismic Wave, 3 mana instant that does 2 damage to any target, and 1 damage to each non-artifact creature target opponent controls. So you could potentially hit one creature for 3 if you target a creature, and then 1 damage to all their non-artifacts. This is somewhat like a one-sided board wipe against weenie decks, and it's got some versatility of 2 damage to any target, so you could target a player directly. I like Seismic Wave. I think it's got some potential to see some play, especially since it's instant speed. I guess we'll see if it gets played at all, but I kind of like its design. I think it's half decent. Just being able to do up to 3 damage to a single target and just like hit everything else in the process is kind of cool. And a board wipe that can, one-sided, well, not true board wipe, that can hit a player directly is kind of cool. 2 damage to any target. So you don't see that too often. It's somewhat unique. All right, Unforgiven one. This card is pretty solid. All right, another. You got to have modified creatures for it to work. It's a 2/3 menace for 3. When it attacks on attack trigger, not on combat damage. So on attack triggers are way better. So this thing's quite good. Return target creature with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So once again, another one of those effects that's just going to bring a creature back. Some recursion there. Now where X is the number of modified creatures you control. So you got to have at least one modified creature unless you've got 0 casting cost stuff. I guess if you've got ornithopters and stuff in your graveyard, it'll bring those back, even if you don't have any modified. But yeah, I feel like this guy's definitely got some potential. He's got some nice card advantage on him potentially if you can get him online. And 2/3 menace is going to be kind of hard to block, so he's probably going to get some damage in. I feel like this card is half decent. All right, a couple other pretty cool cards. I like these. All right, let's talk about Containment Construct first. It's a 2/1 for 2. Not a big deal there. But whenever you discard a card, you can exile that card from your graveyard. So it hits your graveyard, and then you choose to exile it if you want. And if you do that, you can play that card. So that's kind of cool. I mean, if you've got a bunch of loot effects, it essentially says, you can end up just playing the card you discard. So it can kind of turn loot into just draw a card a lot of times if you wanted to play that thing you were going to discard. But you had to make a choice. Now you can say, oh, yeah, I'll discard it, but play it. So super cool. I just feel like this has some real potential of giving you a lot of card advantage in the right type of deck. And it might actually go well with this card on the right, the Ogre Head Helm, which has the really interesting art. Look at this thing. All right, so a decent stat line. A 2/2 for 2 is not bad. And it's one of these reconfigure equipments, Ogre things. Equipped creature is +2/+2. Okay, whenever Ogre Head Helm or equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, this is great. You may sack it. If you do, discard your hand, draw 3. So this could potentially, yeah, it's kind of like the old Ox from whatever set that was. Yeah, this is definitely got some potential. Just being able to cycle your hand away, or as if you're playing mono red aggro, and you've gotten rid of all the cards in your hand, you're gonna want to sack this and draw 3 basically. And it's got reconfigure to buff up one of your little guys if need be. And this is optional. You can just be using it as the +2/+2 or as a 2/2, and you don't have to sack it. So I feel like this is, I don't know if it's great. It might be like too situational or too hard to really use to be good. But it's an interesting card, and I think it's worth being aware of. All right, and we got Rabbit Battery. I love the art on this. It's a rabbit battery. It's the Energizer Bunny. Alright, so it's a 1/1 haste for 1 mana, which is decent in mono red aggro no matter what. But also, you can reconfigure it for 1 red mana and give equipped creature +1/+1 in haste. So even late game, it's going to be half decent to drop one of your bigger creatures buff it up a little, give it haste so you can swing right away. Yeah, not bad, not bad. Alright, next up we have Flame Discharge. Now this is an instant that hits creature or planeswalkers at instant speed with X. And I think we already actually maybe solved this one before, but this is decent removal. Flame Discharge is definitely decent removal, especially in limited. Constructed, probably not, but in limited it's kind of getting to premium removal. Here we have Invigorating Hot Springs, which is a little bit like Rhythm of the Wild. Not quite as good though. It says modified creatures you control have haste, and that's you know, for 3 mana, Golgari, not Golgari, whatever the Gruul colors, red, green, and one other. Alright, so if you can modify your creatures frequently, they'll get haste. That's, I guess, something, but that's going to actually be kind of hard to make relevant, I think, because you're already paying the cost of casting the creature. You don't always have additional mana to modify it right away, so it's going to be kind of hard to use. I guess where it has something else that's pretty easier to use, though. When it ETBs, has 4 +1/+1 counters on it, and you can, once per turn, you can remove one of these +1/+1 counters and put it on a creature. And it's at sorcery speed and only once each turn. So you're at least going to get to put these counters on the stuff. Oh, wait. This is better than I thought, actually. So I was saying it costs more mana to modify stuff, but here's where that changes. Counters are modifications. So you put one of these counters on something right away. It has haste. Yeah, this is actually pretty good. So it can do that 4 times. It can basically do the hasty +1/+ thing 4 times, but only once per turn. Yeah, this is not bad. This is definitely worth playing. It actually somewhat reminds me of like Xenagos or something, you know, the old indestructible Xenagos god that gives things double power and haste. This gives haste, it buffs it up a little bit, it's cheaper, it sits out as an enchantment. Yeah, this is decent. It's decent. It's not so, it doesn't give your entire board haste like Rhythm of the Wild does, but yeah, that's definitely worth being aware of. Not too bad. Not too bad at all. Alright, we got Dokuchi Silencer. Ninjutsu for 2. Deals combat. You can discard a creature card. If you do, destroy target creature or planeswalker the target player controls. So you can use this guy as removal. You get to sneak him in with Ninjutsu. But you do have to discard a creature card, which makes him a lot weaker. I guess if you've got a lot of stuff that's not very valuable, it's worth using this to destroy some big legendary problem creature. But I don't think it's very reliable removal, so I don't know. We'll see if he gets played, and he's all right. All right, a couple other interesting cards I think worth mentioning. Gravelighter. Now this has some multi effect. It's a 2/2 flying for 3. Not too bad. Sweet art on it, by the way. All right. When it ETBs, draw a card if a creature died this turn. So that's kind of cool. It can replace itself. Otherwise, each player sacks a creature. So you can use this as the trigger to make everybody sack a creature, which is nice. Or you can draw a card and get a 2/2 flyer. Yeah, this is a cool card. It's definitely going to be played. I wish it was like a zombie or something, but it's just a spirit. So, alright. Still cool, though. Still a decent card. I like it. Roadside Reliquary. The land that enters untapped, taps for colorless. You can pay 2, sack it, draw a card if you have an artifact, draw a card if you have an enchantment. So it's potentially sack, draw 2 cards. That's where it's going to be in its good place. You know, late game when you're flooded out anyway. Sacking this to draw 2 cards is kind of a big deal. We'll see if it sees play. It's cool though. I like it. All right, we got a rare here. I guess we'll talk about it. It's a 3/3 for 4, but it's got haste. Not the greatest stat line, but at least it's got haste and yeah, really interesting art. So whenever it attacks, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. I guess you could put the counter on it and make it a 4/4 right away, which makes it a lot better and it grows every turn. So this might be a lot better than it seems at first because it can buff itself up. And then it does something else. When it deals damage to an opponent, oh wait, when Thundering Raju deals, then, oh, okay. So when you, okay, let me make sure I'm reading this right. When it attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Could be it or another creature. Then Thundering Raiju deals X damage to each opponent where X is the number of modified creatures you control other than Thundering Raiju. So if you put in the +1/+1 counter on it, this is going to do nothing at first, but if you're buffing up your other creatures or you have other modified creatures, it's going to do a little extra damage. So I'm still debating whether this is good or not, but it's at least interesting. This other card over here is terrible. We don't need to talk about it. Alright, a few somewhat interesting cards here. Touch of the Spirit Realm. It's another one of those, that white has so many of these. ETBs, exile an artifact or creature until it leaves the battlefield. Yeah, so a decent white removal to get rid of an artifact or a creature. But it also has a channel effect. So you can pay 2, discard it, exile an artifact or creature, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So this is going to be nice for either saving your creatures that are targeted or artifacts that are targeted, or if you want to flicker to get another ETB trigger. Not too bad. So it's nice that it has some versatility on it. It can just be removal, or it can be a little trick. So I kind of like it. I think it's pretty cool. Mind Link Mech. This is kind of cool too. A 3-mana 4/3 flying vehicle. Whenever it becomes crewed for the first time, each turn, till the end of the turn, it becomes a copy of target non-legendary that crewed it, except it's 4/3. So essentially, you probably want to get like the on attack triggers or deals combat damage to a player type triggers. You can basically put them on this Mind Link Mech, which is interesting. Alright, we got a rare here, the Kotos, the Silent Spider. When it ETBs, you exile something other than the basic land from an opponent's graveyard. You search their hand, library, and graveyard for all those cards and exile all of them. And then you can play one of them for as long as you control Kotos. So, okay, she's a 4/4 for 5 mana. Kind of a bad stat line, but this is kind of good. If someone's playing a lot of recursion stuff and you just want to get rid of all their something that they're trying to recur all the time out of their deck. So she might come in as a sideboard card or something occasionally to do that, but also being able to play one of those cards could be decent if it's something very relevant for you to play. So aside from trying to shut off someone's graveyard stuff that they're going to do, can also just be a little bit of card advantage and potentially get you a really big spell. But kind of pricey for the stat line in general. ETB Trigger, though. ETB Trigger is always nice. I don't know if it's good or not, but it's interesting. Alright, we got Mech Hanger. Something you definitely want in any of your mech decks in general, because, well, taps for colorless, comes in untapped, that's nice. And you can use 1 mana of any color for casting pilots or vehicles, so that's nice. And its last thing is 3 tap, a vehicle becomes an artifact creature. So it's got the ability to just get that kind of pseudo crew going on if you don't have any other creatures to crew. So a nice land to have in those decks, but otherwise not great anywhere else really. Alright, Roaring Earth. This card is potentially quite good. I'm still debating whether it's good or not. I guess it's okay. Its worst case scenario, it's kind of bad if you don't really get to use its landfall trigger. But it had basically said, well, it's an enchantment for 2 mana, green enchantment. Whenever land ETBs under control, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature or a vehicle. So somewhat like, I don't know, you're probably going to get that every turn early game. You're just going to be able to pump creatures by playing lands, which is not bad. Nice little bonus effect, but that's not like super great or anything. Where this really shines is if you draw this late game, it is still useful because you can channel it with X green, discard, put X +1/+1 counters on target land, becomes a 0/0 green spirit with haste, still land. So you can do this as a surprise blocker, or yeah, if you're just drawing this late game and you don't think you're going to be playing many more lands anyway, you can just make one of your lands a giant creature. So I feel like this has enough potential. Early game, you can play it to get the value out of your landfall stuff. Late game, you can still make a big creature. Yeah, this card is decent. Roaring Earth is definitely decent and will see some play for sure. Alright, the Blossom Prancer. I guess this thing's decent. It's a 4/4 reach for 5 mana, green. Look at the art. Sweet art. This set has just a lot of great art. Alright, on ETB, look at the top 5 of your library. You can reveal a creature or enchantment card and put it into your hand. So essentially, yeah, it's going to dig 5 deep and get you a creature or enchantment on ETB. And if you fail, you still gain 4 life. If you didn't put a card into your hand this way, you gain 4 life. So even if you fail to find, you're still going to at least gain life. And it's got reach. So I think this is really strong and limited. If you can draft this card and playing green, it's going to be a great get. Just, it has so much stability on it. Just, you're going to get a card you need. You're going to potentially gain life if you don't need a card. You get a flying blocker. If you got ways to flicker it or make it ETB again, you can do it again. Pretty good. I think Blossom Prancer has an interesting place. Alright, we got Replication Specialist. So this is, I think, worth talking about. Alright, so it does cost a blue and 4 generic to 5 mana. Kind of expensive, but you get a 3/4 flying. Not the greatest stat line, but I don't think that's really the point of this card. That's just kind of like, alright, it's a decent body in the air. Okay, so it reads, whenever a non-token artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay a generic and a blue mana. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that artifact. So if you've got a lot of artifacts that are not legendary, you can just get a lot more of them. And this could be pretty relevant for big creatures. If you're playing a lot of non-legendary, I don't know, you name it, golems or something, I guess, you can get a bunch of them, or constructs in general. So there's just a lot of card advantage you can pull with this. It's going to be an interesting card. Given that there's so many artifacts in the set, I feel like this is going to be really strong and limited, just based on the number of copies you're probably going to be able to make mid to late game. I don't think it's going to be playable in really any other format, but it's a really interesting card and it's definitely worth mentioning. Alright, I don't know, I guess I'll mention these because they're somewhat interesting. Alright, March of Burgeoning Life. I'm sorry, this is one of the worst cards I've ever seen. It's like Green Sun Zenith, except completely unplayable version of Green Sun Zenith. It is instant, so there's that. Green and X, you can make it cheaper by exiling green cards from your hand to pay for at least 2 of it. Alright, choose target creature with mana value X or less. Search your library for a creature card with the same name as that creature. So completely unplayable in Commander. You probably got to have 4 of that creature. Anyway, you put that card into the battlefield tapped, which is something, but you got to have at least 1 of them in play. So this might be somewhat playable if you've got a lot of 4/ofs that you definitely want more of. But, yeah, I mean, you can't get legends because, legend rule, and you already got to have a creature in play to target, and if they remove it, this just becomes a wasted spell. This is just a terrible card. You're just going to get 2 for 1 all the time trying to play this, or you're just going to have a really hard time being able to play this. Because let's think about it a little bit. How's the flow of the game going to go if you try to use this? You got to play the creature, so you probably tapped out if you're trying to, do this quickly like you need to. And then next turn, you have to save mana for this, and probably use your opponent's end step to surprise them. And if they end up just saving removal, you either have to decide, okay, they might just 2 for 1 me by removing whatever I'm targeting, so I gotta wait. Then you just wasted all that mana leaving it open. There's just so many situations where this is gonna just be a wasted card after you try to spend a lot of mana on it, or you're just gonna try to use it and it's not gonna do what you really wanted anyway. Oh god, it's terrible. I don't know why I'm mentioning it, honestly. It's just another one of those dead rares. That's really unfortunate to pull. Alright, Acquisition Octopus. This is a decent uncommon. It's a 2 mana 2/2 Equipment Octopus. And when it does combat damage to a player, draw a card. I always like these. They're always just, you can often just get a few cards out of them, so it's kind of cool. A little pricey for 2/2, but whatever. It's also got Reconfigure, so you can put it on something else. Whenever that does combat damage, draw a card. So you can potentially put it on a little flyer or something. I just feel like this is going to get you... It's almost guaranteed because of the Reconfigure, and if you have other flyers in blue, you're going to get some combat triggers on it. I think this is a decent little card advantage card, mainly for limited. I don't think it's really good anywhere else, but kind of cool. Alright, I really like this little uncommon here, the Reinforced Ronin. I think he's better than he seems, so let's observe. If your opponent doesn't have blockers, he's just like a guaranteed 2 damage every turn for 1 red mana. That's like a free shock on your opponent every turn if they don't have blockers. Quite good, because he's a 1 mana 2/2 haste. Alright, pretty good. At the beginning of your end step, you return him to your hand. So you could just kind of do this every turn and whittle your opponent down potentially if they... It's going to be pretty good against control decks. They're not really going to want to counter him because he's just a 1 mana thing. And he's not hardly worth removing, but they might be forced to, in which case you're going to be like, alright, cool. I don't mind. And worst case scenario, if they have big blockers and you can't really use this 2 damage every turn ability, you can pay 2 and discard him, draw a card. So yeah, I think that makes him pretty good. I think that makes this card pretty solid. So something to be aware of. Probably going to see it in some mono red aggro decks, especially against, you know, I guess the best thing about him is he's immune to sorcery speed board wipes because he's always going to bounce back to your hand. Alright, next up, this is a pretty cool card. It's got Flample. Anything with Flample's cool. Alright, Hinata Dawn Crown. Probably a commander card. Guess we'll see. Yeah, 4 colors, blue, red, white, 1 generic, 4/4 flying, trample for 4 mana. So not too bad of a stat line. Alright, spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each target. So this is gonna, you know, in these colors, blue, red, white, there's a lot of target spells. It's gonna make all of those cheaper for you, which is nice. But it also makes spells your opponents cast cost 1 more to cast for each target. So it makes yours cheaper, makes your opponents more expensive. Kind of a stacksy card. And it's a 4/4 flying trample. Yeah, I can see this being pretty interesting. People are definitely going to want to play this in Commander and stuff. It's a pretty cool card. Nashi, we already talked about Nashi in the last video. Alright, this card is super cool. Ishin, 2 heavens is 1. It's a red, white, black, so 3 mana, and it's a 3/4. Alright, not too bad. So what's it do? It's a legendary human samurai. If a creature attacking causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. That is super cool. If you've got a lot of on-attack triggers in your deck, and you've got these colors, you definitely want this guy. Very much a commander card, but we might see him in a few standard decks here and there. So yeah, this is a cool creature to introduce. You know, decent stat line, a nice double triggers, which is going to be quite relevant for a lot of decks that have a lot of those to begin with. And there are just a lot. There's like, trying to think of some, but you know, there's a ton of good ones. There's Sword of the Animist, there's Sun Titan, and some other Titans that trigger on attack. He's going to just double all that stuff up. So yeah, he's super cool. It's one of those things where, you know, when you're building up your board, you get to a point where your board state just does too much. He's going to be one of those cards that helps it do too much and take over. So very cool. I think he's definitely one to acquire and watch out for. Alright, this is kind of cool. Blade of the Oni. I really love the art. It's a 2 mana 3/1 menace, which is not bad. It's going to get some damage in with that menace. Hard to block. And you can reconfigure it for 4. Black, black, and 2 generic. Equipped creature has base power toughness 5/5, has menace, and is a black demon in addition to its other types. So yeah, you can turn one of your guys into a 5/5 menace if this 3/1 menace is no longer all that useful. It's decent. This is definitely a decent little equipment. But the reconfigure cost is almost too expensive to be usable. So mainly this is just a 3/1 menace. Unfortunately, it's in the Mythic slot. I think this is probably going to be another one of those 10-cent Mythics, unfortunately. But it's kind of a cool card nonetheless. It's just not all that playable in reality. I don't know, though. Being a 3/1 menace for 2 mana kind of makes it somewhat playable, but 3/1 menace for 2 mana these days, that's like common, maybe uncommon type stat line. I don't know if this whole reconfigure thing is enough to really push it to Mythic, in my opinion. I really kind of disagree with that design choice. This should just be a rare. I mean, for real, if you're thinking about it, like, why not make Ishin a mythic, and this a rare. That seems like a no-brainer from a design decision. I really I have a hard time agreeing with Wizards of the Coast design decision. I don't know who's on their design team, but like, where's the wisdom in this? Like, what are you thinking, honestly? Why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you make this guy a mythic? I mean, he's obviously busted and everyone's going to want him. But instead, you make this card that nobody's going to want a mythic. I just don't get it. There's just a lot of that going on in this set that really bothers me. Well, that's just my opinion. Take that for what you will. What's your opinion on that stuff? Alright, a few more little uncommons. Neither of these are that great. One of them's just an Equipment Spider, a 1/4 reach for 3 mana. Can reconfigure for 4. Huge cost, but at least it gives it a pretty big stat line. +1/+4 in reach. I don't know. Okay, maybe. Akri Merge Keeper. This is just a 1/1 that taps for green. Nothing great. But if it's modified, it taps for 2. So that might be okay sometimes. Decent rampy little guy there. Alright, this guy's actually good. Greasefang. Okiba Boss. A 3 mana, 4/3. Okay, it takes a white, a black, and a generic 4/3. Decent stat line. Beginning of combat on your turn. Return target vehicle from your graveyard to the battlefield. Alright, that could be pretty cool. Get your hover bike back and stuff. He's a pilot too. Alright, so this guy's going to be great in equipment decks. Okay, that vehicle gains haste. Return it to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. That's big. Usually stuff like this either stays in play or it exiles. This just returns to your hand, which is, I guess, fine if you're getting something back anyway, because you get to use it right away, and you get to keep it to cast later. So this guy's pretty good. You know, decent stat line, decent ability for the right deck. A cool card. I like it. Alright, I guess we're going to mention the shrines. Go Shintai, the Boundless Vigor. I don't know how to say that exactly. Okay, it takes 2 mana for a 1/1 trample. Shrine. At the beginning of your end step, you can pay 1. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on target shrine for each shrine you control. This is not bad. This is really going to grow out of control pretty quickly if you've got a shrine deck. Just another one of those shrine things that just grows out of control. So naturally, you probably want to put the counters on it because it's got trample and you can swing and trample over with it. But if you feel like they're going to kill it, you can spread them out some, so that's not too bad. Well, it puts them all on one, but you know, you can put them all on one this turn and put it all on another one next turn, stuff like that. Definitely a shrine you want to have in that shrine deck, I think. Alright, Tales of Master Shishiro. What is this? It's a common saga. Its first 2 lore counters are really bad. They basically do nothing. Well, we can assume they do nothing because they're so useless for 5 mana. But it turns into a 5/5 Vigilance Haste. So this might be good and limited. It's common. You're going to see it a lot. Eventually it turns into a big body. I don't know if that's good or not. I don't think it is. You know, even these cards that aren't good, sometimes there's situations where they could be good. Because, like, you do end up with a 5/5 for 5 mana, which is always good and limited. And if you can make use of these first 2 triggers, then that's great. But a +1/+1 counter right away for 5 mana is so bad, and then you get it again. It's like, all right, it's still really bad, but at least the counter sticks around, and eventually get a 5/5. So if you need something right away to save you, this isn't going to be it. It's going to be a dead card. But if you're already ahead, this is pretty good. But yeah, if you're already ahead, then that's typically, I don't know. Yeah, let's not talk about it anymore. It's not that great. Alright, Discover the Impossible. I can't tell if this is good or not. Alright, it's 3 mana, instant in blue. Look at the top 5, exile one of them face down, and put the rest on the bottom of your library. So you basically get 1 card. But here's where it kind of shines. You may cast the exile card without paying its mana cost if it's an instant spell with mana value 2 or less. If you don't, put that card in your hand. Alright, so where this is really good, I think, is if you're looking for some answer right away. Maybe you need Counterspell, maybe you need Mana Drain. You know, it's going to be better in the old Legacy formats and in Commander and stuff where, like, you know, you have a lot of 1 to 2 cost counters in your deck and you just need to grab one. And if you can't, at least you still get something. But I don't know, maybe if you're going for that sort of thing, maybe you would rather just run a counter in this slot instead. So I don't think it's actually as good as it seems, but it's an interesting design. We haven't seen anything quite like that yet. All right, I guess we'll talk about the Sky Blessed Samurai. I feel like it's going to be good and limited. It's a 4/4 flying. It costs 7 mana, but it's 1 white and 6 generic. It costs 1 less for each enchantment you control. This might be good in like a shrine deck when you can get it down to 1 or 2 mana. And, you know, dropping a 4/4 flyer for 1 or 2 mana is pretty solid, but I don't know. It's iffy. Definitely got to be in the right deck. It's kind of a cool card, though. All right, we got this Reckoner Bank Buster. 2 mana vehicle. It becomes a 4/4 if you can manage to crew it for 3. It enters with 3 charge counters on it. You can pay 2, tap, remove a charge counter, draw a card. A little card advantage there, but you gotta pay into it. It's not super great. Once you've removed all of the charge counters, it creates a treasure and a 1/1 pilot that can crew with infinite power. So I don't know, not too bad. Definitely something that's, if you need something right. I guess if you need a little card draw power in your deck, it's gonna be half decent. All right, and now we're to where we left off in the last video. So we've covered all the new stuff, I think. I'm going to scroll down and just check. But yeah, Spell Pierce, Cloud Steel's kind of cool. All right, so that's everything there. I think there's some stuff in the Commander that might be worth knowing about. I think these, I don't know if these can be pulled in normal packs. But let's just have a look at some of these Commander ones. I don't know how much I really want to talk about them too much. It's probably just going to be in, you can pull from. Usually these end up coming in set boosters. And of course the commander decks. So you won't find these in draft at boosters at all. So we got this this shrine here that for Wooburg can return an enchantment from your graveyard to the battlefield. Kind of a cool Wooburg effect. It's just a 3/4 shrine. And whenever another shrine enters the battlefield, you get another little 1/1 shrine. So this is going to help you build up a ton of shrines. Pretty cool. Even if you can just get this ETB trigger and build up little shrines, that's going to increase your shrine count. So definitely going to belong in any of those shrine decks. And we got this interesting wizard over here. On ETB, you can sack another creature. If you do, create treasures equal to that creature's power. Somewhat interesting. You could potentially get a lot of treasure out of this. But you got to have something to sack, so that kind of makes it a lot worse. And you can pay 3, sack X artifacts, target creature with power X or less. Return target creature with power X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. X can't be 0. Yeah, there's definitely some potential here, but it's going to be kind of hard to use. So I don't know if Ruthless Technomancer's that great, but it's cool. All right, some more commander stuff. Yoshimaru Ever Faithful, a 1/1 dog for 1 white mana, and it's mythic. That doesn't matter in these commander sets, I don't think, because you just, you get 1 guaranteed anyway in the commander. I guess they're just going to be harder to find in set boosters is the point of that, maybe. All right, whenever another legendary permanent enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Yoshimaru Ever Faithful. Could be pretty cool in commander, because you can bring him out turn 1, and he's going to grow anytime you cast a legend. And he's a partner, so you can have multi-commanders with this guy. Yeah, definitely a cool card. I don't know if it's that great. I wish, I feel like no commander is that great just for being potentially a big body. If it drew you a card or something whenever another legendary entered, then it would be like amazing and everyone would play it. But he's probably not going to get played that much because he just grows a little. It's not really that big of a deal. No other abilities. And not even trample. So yeah, I don't understand why this is a mythic, to be honest, but I guess it's a decent 1-drop. I'll say that, but I just wish it did something else as a commander other than grow. There's already so many of those, and most of them become irrelevant pretty quickly, unless they're flying, but no flying or anything. I guess if you have stuff to give them flying, it's more significant. But we'll see if he gets played. All right, now these Myojin of Towering Might. We'll see a bunch of these. There's 8 casting cost creatures. There seems to be 1 for each color. I don't think any of them are good. I think they're all terror bad, basically. Well, I mean, that's not to say they're not completely unplayable. They are indestructible if you cast them. So whenever he enters the battlefield with an indestructible counter if you cast it from your hand. So that's a pretty big drawback because typically with stuff with this giant casting cost, you want to find a way to cheat it into play because it's hardly worth casting. That's a lot of mana. But if you do manage to cast it, it gets indestructible. If you manage to cheat it into play, no indestructible. So that's kind of a pain. It's also you can remove the indestructible counter, distribute 8+1/+1 counters on other creatures that gain trample. So this is kind of cool. I mean, it's a way to push through with a big attack damage, sort of like Crater Hoof or something. But obviously, Crater Hoof is a million times better than this. Yeah, this guy really has no place as long as you have Crater Hoof in that 8 mana slot. But yeah, I'm trying to think of a case where this is good. It's not particularly good. If you cheat him into play, there's no way to buff your creatures and get trample. You have to cast him. Green doesn't have too much mana or too much trouble getting to that amount of mana, so maybe that makes this one a little better. But let's check out the other ones. There's a bunch of these. Myojin of Roaring Blades, the 8 mana red one. He's a 7/4. Yeah, so if you cast it, he comes in with an indestructible counter. If you didn't cast it, no indestructible, just a plain old 7/4 that does nothing else. So yeah, these are all quite bad if you don't cast them in general. I guess, an 8/8's not bad, but no trample, no indestructible. Ew. Yeah, pretty rough. Not the card you want in your deck. Just play Praetors or something instead, basically. Alright, so this guy, I feel like this might be one of the better ones to cast, though, because, with Big Red, you cast, you can cast some of your red ramp to generate a bunch of red mana, and you bring him out with Indestructible, and his ability's pretty good. Remove the Indestructible, do 7 damage to 3 different targets. So you could kill some problem creatures, you could finish off some players with that 7 damage to face to your 3 opponents in Commander. So I feel like this guy is probably the more playable of them, but still not the greatest, just because red doesn't, well, there's sneak attack, but there's not a whole lot of other ways to sneak stuff in, so you're probably going to be hard casting them in red anyway. The problem is it's just such a dead card in your opening hand. You got to get to 8 mana, and you probably just mulligan if he's in your hand. And that's the same for any of these, I think. So that's kind of their big drawback is, we've seen a lot of other really big creatures that have some cheap channel on them, so they're actually useful early game. But these just don't have that, so it makes them a lot less playable compared to the others. Alright, Myojin of Grim Betrayal, the black one. He's only a 5/2 for 8 mana. Does come in with Indestructible. And let's see, what do? Remove the Indestructible. Put onto the battlefield under your control all creature cards in all graveyards that were put there from anywhere this turn. Alright, definitely some shenanigans you could pull with this guy. Like, you play, well, if you manage to get him into play, Indestructible, and then you play something like Damnation and wipe the board. And then you remove his Indestructible to put all the creatures that just died from Damnation onto the battlefield under your control. But that's going to be kind of hard to pull off. I mean, you got to get them into play first, and then you got to have a board wipe. And your board wipe's got to resolve, and then you do this, and then maybe, none of those have haste, so you still got to wait for the table to go fully around before you can even swing with all those. And there's a good chance by that turn, one of those 3 players had something to wipe your board again. This guy's no longer indestructible because you used his indestructible counter, so you can't just pull that off again. Now, I will say, if you can manage to proliferate these indestructible counters, these guys get a lot better. So if you've got Proliferate in your deck, and you're playing in a hard casting these, it makes for some fun, casual Commander play, I think. But, I don't know, just trying to come up with a case where these are actually pretty good, but overall, so far, they're very lackluster compared to other stuff you could be putting in your deck, in my opinion. Alright, here's the blue one. It's a 3/3 for 8 mana. Yep, if you cast it, it has Indestructible counter. You can remove the Indestructible counter, copy target permanent spell you control 3 times. Alright, that could be really cool. I don't know what you would copy 3 times, that'd be great, but there's something. Trying to think, I guess just like some big enchantment or artifact, or maybe some, well, most of the creatures you could copy are going to be legendary, so let's see what could be fun. Copying Swarm Intelligence 3 times, 4 of these on the board. Let's see what else, like Lurking Predators, a bunch of Lurking Predators on the board. Something like that could be pretty fun. You know, any of these big enchantments that do massive stuff once they hit the board and get to sit around, having just three more of them could be pretty crazy. There's probably a ton of them you guys could come up with if you think about it a lot. But the big thing is it has to be non-legendary. There's that other blue enchantment with cycling, the shark cyclone thing. There we go. This one might be a decent one because yeah, usually you cycle this, but it just, if you're playing Myojin of Cryptic Dreams, you probably want this in your deck. This is just such a solid card to begin with, and it'd be a great one to copy 3 times. So, yeah, there's a lot of potential with this guy, but still, once again, you gotta hard cast him for 8 mana before you even get the chance of that, and then you probably want to proliferate so you can do this more than once, and if you're really trying to go off. But I kind of like this guy. It opens up some interesting board states you can create that would really be devastating. You don't really see that with the green one. Like, yeah, he might be able to like give things trample and swing for the win kind of thing, but he doesn't really like develop your board state into something that takes over other than being some big creatures. So black one is kind of similar. Sure, it could be annoying, but it's probably going to get wiped on the next go round. This guy, he's decent because he can at least get some solid damage in worst case scenario. And the blue one is just going to potentially enhance your board state so much if you have the right thing to copy with it. That's pretty cool. All right, let's talk about the white one now. It's a 4/6 for that 8 mana. Once again, indestructible. If you cast from your hand, you can remove that indestructible to create a 1/1 spirit for each permanent you control. So I guess you would do this at the right before your turn, end of your opponent's turn, and create like one for each land, for each creature. You could potentially create 10, 20, 30 little 1/1s. And then if you've got some way to buff your board next turn, you could really take over the game with a swing. Yeah, interesting. I kind of like that. Okay, it's not as good as the blue one, I don't think. I think the blue one is probably the best one, kind of by far, just the triple copy. But ultimately, they're all pretty bad, to be fair, as fair as possible. None of these are particularly good or that playable. Just because you can't cheat them into play and get these effects, you just have to hard cast them, and that's a lot of mana. And if it just gets countered, then like you just spent 8 mana on nothing, and that stinks. Or if it just gets exiled, because indestructible doesn't stop exile, and there's a lot of that in Commander. So yeah, not as strong as they might seem, but they're cool. I do like their design. I gotta say, I do like the design. Just having something on them that kind of reduces the cheating of them pulling off their strong effect is kind of good design, I think. All right, and the rest of these, I think for the most part, we covered in the first video. These are kind of cards that were spoiled too soon, and we already talked about any of them, but we'll do a quick scroll. Yeah, we already talked about these. All right, but yeah, that's it for this video. Hope you enjoyed. Wow, this one also went to an hour and a half. So, but this is it. There are going to be no more videos like this on my channel. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you got a good feel of the set from watching these. And yeah, that's kind of the goal. So don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed and subscribe for more MTG content. Peace out, guys.